2005 did a resolution, a bipartisan group did a resolution saying bring this to an end. They renewed that resolution again in 2010, and yet it remains. If we cannot get rid of an agency like the EAC, then we're never going to be able to get rid of anything up here. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, now I would like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. I rise in opposition to the bill. Instead of focusing on jobs and helping middle-class families, the Republican leadership is hard at work today creating additional ways in which corporations and special interests can dominate our elections process. Ending the Presidential Election Campaign Fund opens the door for large political spenders to enjoy an even greater role in the funding of political campaigns. The voluntary public finance system for presidential campaigns was created in the early 70s as a direct result of the corruption of Watergate, the largest political scandal of our generation. Stopping corruption and the appearance of corruption is as important today as it was during the Nixon years. The level of spending by corporations and special interests since the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United should give every American reason for concern. So do my Republican colleagues really believe that more corporate and special interest money in politics is going to benefit in any way the 99% of Americans who don't have lobbyists? The current public financial system for presidential elections has problems. Most notably, it has not kept pace with the cost of modern campaigns, so we should fix it instead of eliminating it. And I would note that the Republican National Committee recently received $18 million from this fund, so if the Republicans think it's such a bad idea, perhaps they should ask the RNC to return the money. As for the Elections Assistance Commission, the EAC is the only federal agency focused on improving federal elections. This was an outgrowth of the disastrous process of the 2000 election. Remember that 100 million votes were cast, but it took the decision of the Supreme Court before a winner was declared. The experience left a black eye on our elections process. It's not something America should go through again. And as state and local budgets are cut, the value of this commission is going to grow. Have there been problems at the EAC? I would ask for an additional 30 seconds. Yes, there have.
And recognized for 30 seconds.
There have been problems, and what should we do about it? We need oversight and reform. We shouldn't just abolish this commission because we're going backwards to the bad old days of inconsistency among voters. I urge my colleagues to focus on the economy, focus on jobs, and don't pass bills that give corporations and special interests even greater influence in our elections. I yield back. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is amazing that there's a reference to the need that we need to focus on jobs instead of doing something like this. If that's the case, we passed about 25 bills this year out of the Republican-led House that dealt with jobs, that dealt with the economy. We have done our job on that, and now it's sitting over in the Senate, who knows where or why. It's awaiting action. So we have been doing those things, the tough decisions, the things that will create jobs if the Senate and the White House will join with us on those things. So that is simply not accurate to say that we haven't been focusing on jobs, because we have done that since we started this year. And we will continue to do so and encourage and urge our colleagues over in the Senate to bring these matters up. They include things that will help on overburdensome EPA regs, with things that will deal with permitting and drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, things that will have a direct impact on our economy and jobs. You know, it is clear, particularly on the EAC, that was created in 2002 after HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, after the Bush-Gore recount, so that we wouldn't have another hanging Chad or butterfly ballot situation. And this agency administered over $3 billion worth of grants to the states for machines. when it was passed, it was designed to be a 3-year agency and program. We're 9 years into this. And instead of trying to say, okay, we showed the chart a minute ago with $5.4 million worth of management costs, and yet only about a little over $3 million in program costs. And the grants for the machines, Mr. Chair, are now gone, and they're not there. We have the letter from the National Association of Secretaries of State, which restates, their position on the resolution to eliminate the EAC, done in 2005, again in 2010. Again, on the EAC, we have reports from different agencies. We have an IG report criticizing the management practices of the EAC. This report was done in March of 2010. We have a report from the EAC's financial records back in November of '08, which I dealt with when I first got on the Committee on House Administration in early '09. This report is an audit of the Election Assistance Commission fiscal year 2008 financial statements. The records were so mismanaged, this agency that the other side wants to keep instead of trying to make us more efficient, that it was so bad that the agency couldn't be audited. The records were too bad to tell them how bad it was. So that lengthy report is available to anyone who cares to read that. Then we have a report from the Office of Special Counsel that was done just in 2009. The Office of Special Counsel talks about having to settle a political discrimination case. An agency that's supposed to talk about fairness and helping in elections themselves gets sued for political discrimination. And one of those that created that problem is the one that voluntarily resigned and received unemployment benefits for a voluntary resignation. We have the organizational chart that shows that the EAC included a special assistant to a vacant position. I can go on and on, Mr. Chairman, on the situation and the mismanagement of the EAC. It is clearly time to say, and I understand there are some things that we could say we need to keep these. We're saying the essential functions of this group, send them on over to the FEC and we can take care of those situations on testing and certification, make the process more efficient, and we'll save monies for the taxpayers. With that, I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Chairman, I'd now like to recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Davis, for 3 minutes.
For 2 minutes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. The gentlelady is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.R. 3463. It might sound surprising, but right behind jobs, one of the top concerns my constituents contact me about is campaign reform. You'd think that campaign rules would be the very last thing people would think about when they're worried about their livelihoods, their mortgages, and their family's health care. But they know that the electoral process is at the heart of everything their government can do for them. The American people are frustrated. They're frustrated by what I call supersized campaigns. It's all too much. It's too slanderous. It's too hard to tell who's paying for what and who's saying what. They feel that big donors, big corporations, and ideological groups are running the show and they're being left out. But the American people care, and they believe in we, the people. Public financing gives the voice back to the middle class. And the Elections Assistance Commission can help election officials better the process for voters. Neither of these is perfect right now. We acknowledge that. But we should be improving rather than eliminating them, throwing away what public financing we have, what financing worked for every president from 1976 to 2004, and making it harder to bring election improvements together is a step in the wrong direction. Rather than making it even harder for the average voter to make a difference, Congress should be improving access to democracy by expanding public financing, assisting election officials, and increasing voting opportunities for all Americans. Our people are our strength, and we have no business shutting them out. The supporters of this bill say it will save us money, but in fact, Mr. Speaker, it will mean our democracy's up for sale. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Chairman, may I make an inquiry as to the amount of time remaining on each side?
You may. You have 16.5 minutes left. 15.5. Gentleman from Pennsylvania has 20.5.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Gentleman from Texas recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman from Mississippi for yielding, and thank the gentleman for Georgia for presiding in an even and fair fashion. One of the arguments that's been made about the EAC, Mr. Speaker, is that it's the Federal Election Commission that ensures every American citizen's right to vote. If only that were true, Mr. Speaker. The National Association of Secretaries of State, which are the organizations in each state that oversee the elections, have called for the dissolution of the EAC. The committee has heard firsthand testimony from Secretaries of State all across the country, and both in 2005 and again in 2010, the National Association of Secretaries of State have called for the dissolution of the EAC. If the organizations that are actually responsible in each state for holding the elections, Mr. Speaker, are asking that the federal agency supposed to help them should be dissolved, I think it would behoove the Congress to listen to the states and, in this case, dissolve this commission. With that, I yield back to the gentleman from Mississippi.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for yielding. Mr. Speaker, there are ongoing attempts to suppress the valid legal vote of some communities in this country. Earlier efforts to stop selected Americans from voting, such as literacy tests and poll taxes, were overturned by this Congress. But while the tactics of these people have changed, their strategy remains the same: intimidation, discourage, or otherwise prevent certain groups of American citizens from voting. Current tactics include burdensome voter ID laws, outrageous registration requirements, dishonest, inactive voter lists, and unlawful disenfranchisement of ex-offenders. To these flagrant tactics, proponents of voter suppression have added more subtle approaches, including disinformation campaigns and behind-the-scenes quiet and unfair purging of voter rolls. Now we are presented with their latest plan to deny certain Americans their right to vote: the elimination of two programs whose sole aim is to ensure that every American's voice is heard in our elections. The Presidential Election Campaign Fund and the Election Assistance Commission are in need of strengthening, not elimination. They help make sure that all voices can be heard and that all votes will be counted. I support improving these programs, but the only reason to want to eliminate them is to further suppress votes. The votes of the same groups who were targeted by Jim Crow laws decades ago. The votes of the same groups who are now targeted by inactive voter lists and voter ID laws and all of the other new tactics designed for a single goal: voter suppression. I urge my colleagues to defeat this bill and defeat yet another attempt to stop American citizens from voting.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I can't believe what I just heard from my friend from Missouri. doing away with the Presidential Election Campaign Fund is not a Jim Crow law. And I'll put my record alongside his on ensuring voting rights to minorities as the author of the latest extension of the Voting Rights Act and one who got the 1982 compromise passed and signed into law by President Reagan. The Presidential Election Campaign Fund was destroyed 3 years ago by President and then candidate Barack Obama. He refused to be bound by its restrictions. Senator John McCain was, and he was put at a significant disadvantage in the general election campaign by running against candidate Obama, who rejected the election campaign funds and raised huge and unlimited amounts of money.
Would the gentleman yield?
I have a limited amount of time. If I have time left, I'll be happy to yield. This year, so as not to disadvantage themselves, that means none of the Republican primary candidates have signed up for presidential election campaign fund money. The Obama money-making machine is running all around the country, and we see this in the newspapers, we hear it on television, and because the campaign fund would limit the amount of money that whomever the Republican nominee, if he took these funds, could use in order to spread his message on why Obama ought to be replaced by the voters, we ought to just get rid of this fund altogether. It was destroyed 3 years ago by then-candidate Obama. We might as well not spend any more taxpayers' funds on it. May it rest in peace.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I'd now like to recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman. We already know that in 38 states there is introduced legislation that would suppress the participation and the votes of young, minority, and elderly voters. Now we see their allies here in Congress who are trying to eliminate the only federal agency charged with improving the conduct of elections and making sure that every vote counts. If you like the direction of the state legislatures, you're going to be thrilled by the legislation before us today to close the Election Assistance Commission. The voters' vote should be behind a curtain of secrecy, but the process by which registration and elections are conducted should be transparent. If not, voters will cease to believe that the process is fair and that their vote counts. Let me remind my colleagues, there is nothing more crucial to democracy than guaranteeing the integrity, the fairness, the accountability, the accuracy of elections. Democracy works only if the citizens believe it does. The system must work and the people must believe in it. But voting shouldn't be an act of blind faith. It should be an act of record. The EAC helps maintain the integrity of the American electoral process. Too many people across the country have lost confidence in the legitimacy of the election results. Dismantling the EAC would further erode that necessary faith in the process. We've discussed several times, and others have talked about it, but if manipulating the outcome of elections occurs, how much easier will it be once the EAC is eliminated? Millions of Americans are casting their votes now on unauditable voting machines, and the results of most elections are not audited. Eliminating the EAC would increase the risks that our electoral process would be compromised by vote manipulation, by targeted voter ID laws, by voter system irregularities. Can we afford to take that risk? Certainly not. Do we want problems to go undetected? I would hope not. Less oversight, lesser standards, less transparency in reporting, less testing, fewer audits weakens our democracy. Abolishing the EAC is the wrong way to go.
Gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a further inquiry as to the remaining time for each side?
You may. You have 12.5 minutes. Gentleman from Pennsylvania has 16.5.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, a distinguished member of the Appropriations and Budget Committees, and also has been heavily involved in this matter as a co-sponsor, and also great work on trying to eliminate and bring to an end the Presidential Election Fund.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. The legislation before us actually does 3 important things. First, it eliminates an antiquated, outdated system of public financing. Second, it terminates an obsolete commission. And then finally, and not incidentally, it actually saves money, something that we talk a lot about around here, but we very seldom actually do. When the Presidential Election Campaign Fund was actually created in 1973, it was during a time before things like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, the widespread use of the Internet did not exist. And that's no longer the case today. Today, it's pretty easy to actually contribute money to a candidate, a presidential candidate, if you want to do it. I would advise anybody, regardless of their political persuasion, to simply type the name of the candidate that they like into the Internet and wait and see what pops up. And they're going to have an immediate opportunity to donate to that individual. There's no need to take public money at a time that we're running $1.5 trillion deficits and divert it to what's essentially political welfare for presidential candidates. It's absolute waste of money. It's so much a waste that our president, who defends the system, but chose not to participate in this system. 2008, he did not participate, did not raise money this way, did not do it during the public campaign, actually broke precedent and, frankly, the commitment he had made earlier in the campaign, and just chose not to do it. And that's fine. That was his right. He was certainly more than adequately funded. His opponent, Senator Clinton, now Secretary Clinton, was also adequately funded. She did not use the public financing system. The one person who did, John McCain, was heavily outspent, although I don't think that had much to do with his defeat. I think, honestly, Americans know how to contribute to presidential candidates. They don't need the federal government letting them check off a portion of their taxes and divert it for that purpose. In addition, public participation in this system has declined radically. It's never reached even 1/3 of American taxpayers that are willing to do this, peaked at 28%, and in 2009 was down to 7% of American taxpayers chose to do it. So we're not denying anybody the ability to participate. We are giving very expensive welfare to presidential candidates and to political parties at a cost to the taxpayer when that cost can't be afforded. 2 weeks ago, we had something that occurred that honestly ought to concern everybody on this floor, and I don't fault either party for it, but the Democratic Party and the Republican Party both received $17 million for their conventions from the Federal Treasury of the United States. $17 million for 2 political parties, actually 34 in total, to actually run their conventions from the American taxpayer. Who really believes that's a needed expenditure? Each one of those parties, and I can tell you because I used to be the chief of staff of one of them, will spend over $100 million on their convention. They don't require additional federal help. It's simply a waste of time and a waste of money. As for the Election Assistance Commission, and I say this as a former Secretary of State, this is a commission whose time has come and gone. You know, whatever good it currently spends over 50% of its budget on administration, not on direct assistance to the states. And the idea that state governments and states who have been running elections for 200 years suddenly need the federal government to tell them how to do it and spend this kind of money, I think is just absurd. Frankly, the National Association of Secretaries of States, which is the oldest public association of elected officials and appointed officials in the United States, has twice called for the elimination of this. They don't feel the need for it. They certainly don't see that they're getting any assistance from it. So whatever good it paid in the immediate aftermath of the 2000 election, I think, is now concluded. With that, I ask an additional 30 seconds from the gentleman.
No, I'll give, Mr. Chairman, another minute to the gentleman.
Gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. Without, putting too fine a point on it, this is a system and this is a commission who simply exists to solve problems that aren't problems. We have no problem funding presidential campaigns in the United States. There's plenty of money, probably too much money around. There doesn't need to be taxpayer money. Nor do political parties have a problem funding their conventions. They can do it themselves. Nor do we need a commission whose purpose has now passed into history and whose people that are supposed to, whose entities it's supposed to serve, the Secretaries of State around the country have actually asked us to abolish it. So let's just finally prove we can get rid of outmoded programs, end the expenditures, and actually save the taxpayers some money. And in doing so, I can assure everybody on the floor that our democracy will remain healthy, our elections will be fair, and the American people in their wisdom will figure out which candidate to contribute to if they choose to contribute to any candidate at all. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I would now like to recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price, for 4 minutes.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise for the third time this year to oppose a measure that would summarily repeal our system of public funding for presidential elections. Once again, the House majority seems intent on dismantling the few remaining safeguards that we have against the influence of special interests in politics following the Supreme Court's Citizens United ruling. The fact that they are ostensibly bringing this bill forward as a deficit reduction measure in order to pay for a bill to undermine workers' rights is the height of cynicism. This bill before us today would destroy one of the most successful examples of reform that followed the Watergate scandal. Dare we forget what that scandal was about? The committee to re-elect the president, fueled by huge quantities of corporate cash, paying for criminal acts, and otherwise subverting the American electoral system. The hallmark of the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1974, enacted at a time when public confidence in government was dangerously low, was our voluntary program of public financing for presidential elections. To this day, this innovative reform stands as one of the greatest steps we have taken to bring transparency and accountability to our electoral system, and it's worked remarkably well. Utilized in the general elections by every Republican and Democratic presidential nominee from 1976 through 2004 and by John McCain in 2008, although in recent years the need for modernization has become evident. Perhaps the best example of the program's success is President Ronald Reagan, who participated in presidential public financing in all three of his presidential campaigns in 1976, 80, and 84. The Reagan case illustrates the positive effects public financing has had in both parties, at both the primary and the general election stages. It illuminates the way in which the system benefits candidates who challenge the party's establishment. It highlights the system's focus on small donations rather than big bucks from large contributors. Note that this is no free ride, no willy-nilly spending program. Candidates must seek the support of thousands of small donors during the primary to prove their viability, and only then do they receive matching funds. Today, one could wish, in light of the positive history of this program and prior Republican support, for a bipartisan effort to repair the system and restore its effectiveness. I don't know of any policy that better exemplifies the maxim, mend it, don't end it, than this one. Earlier this year, Congressman Van Hollen and I reintroduced a bill that would do just that. It would modernize the presidential public financing system and again make it an attractive and viable option for presidential candidates. Our bill would bring available funds into line with the increased cost of campaigns. It would adjust the program to the front-loaded primary calendar and enhance the role of small donors. The bill has been carefully designed and deserves deliberation and debate. Instead, we're faced with yet another Republican attempt to open the floodgates for corporate cash and special interest influence to pour into our political system. With confidence in government at rock bottom and the perception of government corruption through the roof, why is the majority trying to return us to the dark days of Watergate? Let's instead restore and improve our public financing system and move on to real solutions to put our nation's fiscal house in order. Let's not use valuable floor time to pass a bill that has no chance of becoming law. The American people want us to get to work on important measures to revive the struggling economy and put people back to work. So I urge the majority to heed that call. Get to work on passing appropriations bills, fixing the Medicare physician reimbursement, extending the payroll tax cut and unemployment benefits, patching the AMT, and reauthorizing the FAA in time for families' holiday travel. I'm afraid these pleas are falling on deaf ears in this chamber these days. But we need to get to work on the people's business, not on this flawed bill that threatens to allow big money to play an even larger role in our politics. Now, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I would now like to recognize the gentleman from Texas and a valid member of the House Administration Committee, Mr. Gonzalez, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Texas recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in opposition to this bill in its entirety, but especially to that provision which attempts to eliminate the Elections Assistance Commission. I need to address a few points that have been made by the proponents of this bill, because I was there when this original bill came up for consideration years ago, and I've been there for the subsequent hearings in the Committee of Jurisdiction. First of all, when it comes to the Secretaries of State, they've been opposed to the creation of the Election Assistance Commission from its very beginning. This is nothing new. Their renewal of opposition basically used a form letter that didn't even change the 2006 date. The 2010 opposition letter actually referred and still used the same letter of previous years. But the most important thing to point out is the Secretaries of State have multifaceted responsibilities and obligations. One of them is to conduct elections. But each one of us in this body know who really runs an election, and it's going to be your local election administrators. You and I and anybody involved in the electoral process knows that on Election Day, you're not going to find Secretary of State personnel at the polling places. When the ballots are mailed for absentee voting, you're not going to find anyone from the Secretary of State's office. They're not going to count the ballots. They're not going to be there. It is a local effort, and that's what the Election Assistance Commission is doing. It was never meant to have a lifespan of 3 years. If you read the bill carefully, and Mr. Hoyer, who will be taking the floor later, will remind us of the legislative history of that particular bill that created this commission. If we are to criticize them for an inordinate amount of their budget being applied to personnel, then we must look in the mirror as members of Congress, because I assure you, because I also sit on a committee, obviously the same committee, that entertains the budget requests of the different committees. And each one of those committees and individual members of Congress will tell you that they spend a greater proportion of their budget on personnel than the Election Assistance Commission. And there's good reason for it. It was never really intended to fully fund every effort at the local level. It's to give advice. That's why I have received in the past from local election officials from Maryland, Texas, Florida, and Ohio. The local experience in Texas, in my county, Bear, was that we saved $100,000 by the suggestions and recommendations that were issued by the Commission. Lastly, you criticize the Commission for not functioning because it doesn't have a full body of commissioners. But whose fault is that? It's the individuals on the other side of the aisle that have blocked consideration. That reminds me, when I was a lawyer, we used to have the old joke about the individual defendant who was there charged with murdering his parents, and at the end of the trial goes before the jury and asks for mercy because he's an orphan. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you really want to help the 10 seconds, sir. If you want to help your local election officials, vote no on this bad bill. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Rokita, who's a distinguished member of the Committee on House Administration, a former Secretary of State for the state of Indiana, and he also served as president of the National Association of Secretaries of State.
Gentleman's recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding time. Listening to the prior comments, I can't help but wonder if certain members of this body can't help but not do more than one thing at a time, but certainly your secretaries of state and your local election officials can multitask. And they do an excellent job of executing the state's elections. I want to focus on the portion of the bill that eliminates the Election Assistance Commission, Mr. Speaker. As has been said, I have a unique perspective on this. In 2005, as Indiana Secretary of State and serving as the president of the National Association of Secretaries of State, I co-authored the successful resolution that was talked about earlier to dissolve the EAC after the 2006 election. As the oldest organization of bipartisan elected officials in the nation, we at NASS renewed the call to dissolve the Commission in 2010. And no, Mr. Speaker, I can assure you from the debates that we had in that organization, it was not a form letter, it was not a form renewal. Furthermore, the vote for the renewal was 24-2, with 13 Republicans and 11 Democrats calling for its dissolution. This is not a partisan issue. We recognized on a bipartisan basis that the Election Assistance Commission cannot be justified on the grounds of fairness, justice, opportunity, or necessity. EAC bureaucrats do not make elections fair. In fact, EAC makes them less fair by producing biased, inaccurate reports on the state of elections in our nation and offering recommendations based on these junk studies. EAC bureaucrats do not enfranchise voters. States and individuals do that, as our federal Constitution dictates. Giving unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats in Washington more power over elections does not lead to more just election outcomes. If anything, it interferes with a just outcome because these bureaucrats, many with an ideological axe to grind, face little or no accountability for their actions, and they know it. Voting is fundamental to our system and the legitimacy of our government. Ensuring qualified American citizens have an opportunity to vote is essential. The Constitution tasks the states with execution and maintenance of elections, not federal bureaucrats. And like I said, Mr. Speaker, I believe states do an excellent job, and by managing elections closest to the voters at the state and local level, we stand the best chance of ensuring opportunity for all and correcting injustice if the opportunity to vote is denied or interfered with.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I would now like to recognize the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 2 minutes. Without objection.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, as a former Secretary of State for the state of Rhode Island and now a member of the United States Congress, I have serious concerns about this bill. Mr. Speaker, voter participation is the cornerstone of our democracy and a fundamental civic duty that empowers every citizen to effect change within our society. Unfortunately, many individuals with disabilities have been historically shut out of the voting process due to a lack of accessibility. That's among my particular concerns with this bill. Now, we have made impressive strides in recent years to close that gap, and the Election Assistance Commission, established under the Help America Vote Act, was an important part of that effort. As a member of Congress who lives with a disability, co-founder of the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus, and has worked at both the state and federal levels to modernize and make accessible our voting systems, I find it unconscionable that the Republican leadership is considering this bill to abolish the Election Assistance Commission, an agency whose fundamental mission is to promote security, accessibility, and trust in our electoral process. Now, could the EAC use the reforms? Yes. But the Republican solution of eliminating an agency with such an important mission is unnecessary. Everyone, Mr. Speaker, should have full faith in our system of elections, including seniors, military members, minorities, and people with disabilities. And that's exactly what the Election Assistance Commission seeks to provide. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have precious little time left before the end of this congressional session. Instead of considering a bill that will only serve to erode America's faith in our democracy, our time would be far better spent rebuilding it by focusing on job creation, getting this economy back on track. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill and turn our attention to legislation that will extend tax relief for families and small businesses, reduce unemployment, and create greater economic stability. That is exactly what my constituents expect from me, and that's exactly what the American people expect from this Congress. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren. He is the distinguished chairman of the House Administration Committee.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Chairman, H.R. 3463 will eliminate the Presidential Election Campaign Fund and the Election Assistance Commission. That's good news. The American people have been asking this Congress to get serious about spending, begging us to take a critical look at government operations and get rid of the dead weight. Mr. Chairman, if there ever was, Mr. Speaker, if there ever was a government program and government agency ripe for the cutting, it is the Presidential Election Campaign Fund and Election Assistance Commission. The Election Campaign Fund is an unused government program only supported by a meager 7% of the American people. In other words, 93% of the American taxpayers have opted out of participating in this program. Candidates and nominees have routinely opted out of the system altogether. In 2008, we know then-candidate Barack Obama declined public financing in the general election. In 2012, it's expected that neither general election candidate will participate in the program, and no candidate has requested eligibility thus far in the election cycle. According to CBO, elimination of this program would save the American taxpayers $447 million over the next 5 years and return nearly $200 million to the public treasury for deficit reduction immediately. Now, I know some people think $500 million isn't much. Where I come from, that's a lot. We can eliminate something that the American people have rejected by a vote of 93-7. It seems to me to make sense. Mr. Chairman, the last Congress, the Committee on House Administration held hearings on the issue of taxpayer financing of campaigns. And one of our witnesses asked this question. He said, if the voters are not willing to pay for the program, then why should it continue? As for the Election Assistance Commission, this agency has been the subject of 2 hiring discrimination lawsuits, spends over 50% of its budget on administrative costs, and is asking this Congress for $5.4 million to manage programs totaling $3.5 million. In short, Mr. Speaker, this bill before us eliminates an unused government program, shuts down an obsolete government agency, saves the taxpayers $480 million over 5 years, and returns almost $200 million to the Treasury. How could we not vote for it? I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, could I inquire how much time we have?
The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 7 minutes. The gentleman from Mississippi has 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd now like to recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman. After $5.3 billion was spent in the 2008 federal elections, I never heard anyone utter a word that said the problem we face today in Washington is that we need more private money in politics. Never has anyone said to me, I wish the super-rich had more influence over our government and elected officials, especially in campaigns for President and Congress. Never received a letter from a constituent that expressed a desire to get further away from one person, one vote, and move closer to one corporation, one vote. What I have heard from my constituents is a deafening demand to get money out of politics. This bill takes us in the opposite direction. We should be chasing the money changers out of the People's Temple, not turning our government into an auction house. This legislation is upside down. Private financing of elections corrodes our democracy. Private contributions to federal elections must end. Private financing equals government in the private interest. Public financing, the hope of government in the public interest. We need to restore our democracy and end private contributions. We shouldn't have any contributions from special interests. We need government of the people, by the people, and for the people returned to this government.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Ryan, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. Let me just take this from 30,000 feet for a minute and reiterate what the gentleman from Ohio said. We have too much private money in the people's house. We can't get anything done now because it somehow may affect what Wall Street's doing. We had a China currency bill on the floor last year, 350 votes, 99 Republicans. We can't even get it up for a vote now in the House because Wall Street doesn't want it. We're in dire straits with trying to balance our budget. We need to ask people making more than $1 million a year to help us close this gap so we can reinvest back in our country. Nothing's happening because Wall Street doesn't want it. We got oil and gas still getting benefits when profits are going through the roof. We can't close that loophole because the oil and gas industry doesn't want it closed. There is too much private money in the people's house. We need public funding of elections. Let every citizen kick in 50 or 100 bucks. And we run elections by letting people on the airwaves, making these debates, making these discussions, having a little bit of money to do it. We've got to reform this country and set us on a path to prosperity. No wonder we can't make investments in public education, public health, public infrastructure, because the private interests are running the whole show here.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. Gingrey. He's chairman of the Subcommittee on Oversight on the House Administration Committee.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the President will listen to the advice of the gentleman from Ohio and sign up for public financing of his re-election effort. But mainly I rise today in strong support of the combined efforts of my good friends, Mr. Harper of Mississippi, Mr. Cole of Oklahoma, to reduce federal spending by ending the public financing of campaigns and conventions and to terminate this Election Assistance Commission. As presidential campaigns in this day and age are becoming increasingly expensive to the tune of hundreds of millions of billions of dollars, the idea of having taxpayers contribute matching funds to them has become ludicrous. This practice would save $617 million over 10 years, and I commend Mr. Cole for his work to reduce spending. As far as Mr. Harper's efforts regarding the Election Assistance Commission, as a member of the Committee of Jurisdiction over EAC, the House Administration Committee, I've learned firsthand that this agency has outlived its usefulness, it's mismanaged its resources, all the while costing taxpayers, we, the taxpayer, millions of dollars a year. Mr. Speaker, the Election Assistance Commission's budget request for 2012 devoted 51.7% of its budget to management overhead costs. Let's eliminate this commission and support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to recognize our distinguished Democratic whip, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer. 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Maryland, distinguished whip, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend. I thank the gentleman for yielding. First of all, we ought to be talking about jobs. The contention that this bill funds bills that are about jobs is spurious, in my opinion, and no economist, in my opinion, will assert that that is the fact. We ought to be dealing with jobs. But what are we dealing with? Now, I know of what I speak. I tell the gentleman from Georgia, I understand as a member of the House Administration Committee for, I think, some 15 years. I, along with Bob Ney, was the sponsor of the Help America Vote Act, which created the Election Assistance Commission. So I know something about the Election Assistance Commission. It was created because in the year 2000 we had a disastrous election which was resolved finally, but not very acceptably by most people, whether your candidate won or lost. So the Assistance Commission was created for the purposes, for the first time in history, of having some federal presence in the oversight of federal elections. Not mandatory, but advisory. Now, what we see, frankly, throughout America in Republican-controlled legislatures in many, many states is an effort to make voting more difficult, to, in my opinion, suppress the vote, to require more and more documentation of people who have already registered to vote and claiming problems that exist that do not exist. Now, if you want to obfuscate the election process, if you want to suppress the vote, if you want to make it more difficult, what is one of the things you want to do? Eliminate the Election Assistance Commission, whose responsibility it is to advise and counsel on best practices to assure that every American not only has the right to vote,
but is facilitated in casting that vote and making sure that that vote is counted. That's what the Election Assistance Commission does. And what do they want to do with the Election Assistance Commission responsibility? Transfer it to the Federal Election Commission, whose sole responsibility is to oversee the flow of money into elections. They neither have the expertise nor, frankly, do they have the time. They hardly have the time to do what they're supposed to do right now. Now, frankly, the Bush administration did not fund the Election Assistance Commission very robustly. And like every agency, it requires and should have proper oversight and should, in my view, be more vigorous in the carrying out of its responsibilities. That is not, however, a reason for eliminating it. The only reason for eliminating it is to make voting more obscure, less oversight, and less assurance to our citizens that they not only have the right to vote, but that their vote will be cast
The gentleman's time has
and counted
expired.
correctly.
The gentleman from Mississippi.
And I thank very much the Speaker for the additional time that he so graciously gave me, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Speaker, may I make an inquiry as to remaining time for each side?
1.5 for the gentleman from Mississippi. 2.5 for the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
We only have one speaker to close. If I could reserve the balance of my time till the Democratic leader gets here.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert. He's a distinguished member of the Judiciary Committee and a former judge.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Listen, let's cut to the chase. This is a tax credit for people that want to contribute to the President's campaign fund. Because they were told you can check this box and it doesn't cost you anything. No, but it takes $40+ million a year away from the fund that could be used for other things, including Social Security, things to shore up those funds, and it gives it to the President's election fund, campaign fund. And I stand with our President Barack Obama on this issue, who found that fund is worthless. It's an impediment to getting elected. So I stand with President Obama in saying, let's get rid of the fund and not use it anymore, and let the $200 million in that fund go to something helpful instead of being an impediment to being elected president. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, we're prepared to close. Mr. Gentleman, we're prepared to close it. All right, thank you. In closing, the Presidential Campaign Fund currently has over $190 million. Tens of thousands of Americans put that money there. They wanted their money to go to this purpose. We would be fooling and deceiving our very own citizens should we pass this bill. They put that money there to be able to have the small say that they can, or $3, whatever it may be, $1, to be able to say who they would want to support and put it toward campaigns. We would be giving back to the Treasury. They already put their money in the Treasury. This would be wrong. We would be fooling the American people. We would be telling them, we told you to check a box off and give us X amount of dollars for a campaign, and now $100 million we're going to take of the money that we told you to check off to use for that purpose. We are no longer using it for that purpose. That's wrong. It's not right. It's deception. And that is why I urge a no vote on this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Speaker, it's been told that we haven't done anything about jobs. Here we have a card that will list 25 different bills that we've done that pass that help on manufacturing, the economy, on energy, that are going to be great job creators. Yet the complaint has been that the EAC is going to is not dealing with those issues. I'll point out that the members that have spoken on the other side of the aisle that this is something that's not appropriate, that it's going to disenfranchise voters, should remember they all voted for this in 2002 when it had its 3-year provision to sunset after that. So I think that argument will not fail. In addition, the EAC has no regulatory or enforcement authority. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlemen, title time for the debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 477, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to reduce federal spending and the deficit by terminating taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions, and by terminating the Election Assistance Commission.
Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further consideration of H.R. 3463 is postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, Chair declares the House in recess of a period less than 15 minutes.
Well, the House is going into